All right, here we go. Today's all about classification and phylogenetic trees, also known as a cladogram. All right, so we have already learned that evolution is change over time. So because of evolution, there's a great diversity of life. And we'll talk more about this when we get to ecology. So scientists need to organize over 2 million organisms. And what you see up here is a picture of a cladogram. Okay, and we're going to learn how to use these today. Here's another one, because you can see them a few different ways, and you're going to see them a few different ways in your activity for today. So what exactly is classification? Classification is grouping organisms based on common ancestors and characteristics. So some ways that we might classify things are based on size, shape, appearance, okay, color. So I know, because I like to be super organized, and people do things differently, but in my closet, just for a prime example, I organize things probably by what it is. So jeans go together, t-shirts go together, long sleeve shirts go together, hoodies go together, long sleeve dress shirts, long sleeve short sleeve shirts, tank tops. Everybody following me? So that's a way of organizing things. Okay, and everybody might do theirs a little bit differently. So a little bit about the history of classification. So first we've got good old Aristotle. And Aristotle classified organisms as either plants or animals. That's it. Plants or animals. Is everything a plant or an animal? No. Okay. So because that being the case, okay, we have the next person known as Carolus Linnaeus. And he developed what is known as a hierarchical system, which classifies in levels based on physical similarities. So Aristotle was plants and animals. Carolus Linnaeus was physical similarities. Okay? So up here is a picture of his classification system. And if you have done your vocab or started on your vocab, you would have seen these terms. So we start up at the top, okay, kingdom, and this is the most general. So you're going to see a lot of things fall in this category. Okay, and then as we work down, we get more specific. So kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, and species is the most specific. Okay, so the best way to remember this is King Philip came over for good spaghetti. Everybody got me? King Philip came over for good spaghetti. Y'all like spaghetti?
No.
So here he is. King Philip came over for good spaghetti. So just remember that kingdom is the broadest and species specific. So species is the most specific. So something else that we need to know about this is this term up here, which is also part of vocab. So he also developed this system of binomial nomenclature, which is how we name organisms using two names. Bi means what? Two. So that's where we get our two names from. So when we are naming an organism, okay, the scientific name consists of two parts, okay, the genus and the species. So for example, our common name is a human. Does anybody know what our scientific name is?
Yes.
Homo sapiens. Homo, genus, sapiens, species. Okay? So, the genus is the second most specific level, as we saw in the classification system, and species is the most specific. This is the easiest to remember, species specific. Okay? So that is how we name organisms scientifically. So that is our scientific name. You don't hear people call us often Homo sapien. Okay, you hear the word human. So obviously I just said this, but Homo would be the genus and sapiens would be the species. So let's just look at this and see if we can figure it out. So what genus do you think this organism belongs to?
Canis.
Canis. And the species?
Familiaris.
Familiaris. Good. Nice job. Okay. Does anybody know what that is?
No. Have you heard?
So no. Okay. So that is the scientific name.
I know the one called
Okay. What about this one?
Okay. Felis domesticus.
So which one's the genus and the species? Domesticus. Okay, that's a cat. Get some. All right. So problems with classification. So what kind of problems do you think scientists could run into if they were just grouping organisms by similar physical characteristics?
They eat different foods. They must live in the ocean. And obviously, if they think a dolphin wouldn't attack you, shark would.
Okay, so just looking at physical characteristics, they do have a lot in common, but at the end of the day, are they the same? No. Okay. All right, same up here.
I still don't know how birds fly. They have like feathers. They have wings too.
All right, so modern classification, this brings us to modern classification. So biologists now group organisms according to their evolutionary relationships. Okay, so we went from plants versus animals to physical similarities, and now we are at evolutionary relationships. So scientists use the following criteria in order to classify organisms. So the first is structural, the second is biochemical, and the third is embryology. And we've seen all three of these before. We just reviewed it earlier. Where did we see these?
We talk about when we're talking about how they look similar and how they identify evolution and they change.
Evidence of evolution. Yes. Okay. So structural similarities deal with similar fossils or anatomy, and we talked about both of those. Okay. Biochemical deals with DNA, proteins, and amino acids, and we said that this is the best piece of evidence. Okay. And then last is embryology, which we also talked about with similar embryos. Okay. So at the bottom, you can see an example of embryos, and I've already showed you this before, and then also with DNA. So let's look at this. Tell me what type of evidence. Comparing unborn fetuses.
Embryology.
Embryology, there you go. Comparing DNA. Biochemical. Comparing the fins of whales and sharks. That's structural, which would be anatomical. Okay. All right, so that takes us into the last piece of classification for today. And this is all about phylogenetic trees, which are also known as cladograms, okay? You will see this, so be very familiar with this. So phylogenetic trees show when in time traits developed, okay? So you can use them in order to do the following. You can find which organisms are most primitive. And when we talk primitive, we're talking about the oldest. And we can also use them to find which organisms are most closely related. Okay? So I'm going to go over how we use this to figure out who's more closely related and what characteristics these organisms have. So here's another example of what you can possibly see. So if you look up here, which one would be the oldest or most primitive? The gibbon. And then the most recent would be the human. Okay? The Homo sapien. Nicely done. In looking at the tree. Because we said that primitive means old or oldest, so it's old and simple. So the most primitive species, when you're looking at a cladogram or phylogenetic tree, are always going to be in the bottom left. And then the most recent are going to be in the top right. So the gibbon was in the bottom left, right? Yep. Top, bottom left, sorry, top right. So when we're looking at a cladogram or phylogenetic tree, we need to know that each branch point represents the common ancestor of two species.
So is species
Here, yes. So if you have common ancestor of 1 and 2, okay, because that's where they branch off. And then this one, because you see this would be a common ancestor of 1, 2, and 3, because this branches off of here. So here's another example. This is a great one, okay? So if you were to look here, you've got your grandparent at the bottom, right? And then you have your parent, and then your parent's sibling. Everybody following? And then you have you and your sibling, and this can keep branching further depending on the amount of siblings. And then over here would be your cousins, first cousins, because this is your parents' sibling. So it's their children. So this is how we look at a cladogram or phylogenetic tree and how we are able to determine what traits or characteristics that they have. So organisms have the traits that come before them. So if you are looking at this particular cladogram, the trait has to come before the organism. So does a hagfish have jaws? No, why? Because it came after. Jaws came after, so they do not have jaws, okay? So another example, everything after the perch has jaws because jaws comes before all of these other organisms, okay? So what characteristic does the salamander have that the perch lacks? Lungs, because the salamander has what characteristics or traits? Lungs and jaws, okay? But the perch doesn't have the lungs, why? Because they came after the perch. Does everybody understand that?
So it has everything. Oh, never mind, I see it.
Okay, now, what do you see different on that cladogram? And we're gonna talk about this.
Pigeon has the feathers to itself.
Okay, so that means what?
And nobody else has.
That nobody else has it. Only the pigeon has feathers because that is only on that specific organism. Does everybody see that? Okay. So species are closely related if they branch off close together. So the closer they are on the phylogenetic tree or cladogram, the more closely related they are. So looking at this specific one, who would be most closely related to the chimp? Who would be the least like the chimp? Perfect. That's it. So let's look at this and run through this. So in the cladogram, what species is most primitive? Primitive means what? Oldest. So the hagfish. What species is the least primitive? The chimp. What traits does the lizard have? Claws or nails, lungs, and jaws. Perfect. What traits does the salamander have? Lungs and jaws. What is the chimp most closely related to? The mouse. And is the lizard more closely related to the salamander or the perch? Okay.